Now, Butterworth explains that the guidance Emerson is referring to is not a specific word of direction. It's a principle. And that principle is divine knowing, and it's always present. Emerson's phrase, lowly listening, means tuning into the principle of divine knowing in us. It's not a pre-recorded message from God telling us where to go or what to do or what the next right move is. It's not like that at all. It's real-time, divine wisdom unfolding in the now by means of us. So our notion of spiritual guidance needs to be clarified. Butterworth describes it as such. God's guidance is the immanence of divine mind that is present in its entirety at every point in space at the same time. Immanence, spelled I-M-M-I-N-E-N-C-E, meaning nearness as opposed to immanence. God is also immanent, meaning innate. But in this case, we're talking about nearness. God's guidance is the immanence of divine mind that is present in its entirety at every point in space at the same time. What are some other ways of saying this? There's not a spot where God is not. Wherever God is, all of God is. Wherever we stand, God is expressing in its full glory by means of us. Lots of different ways we could say it. Divine guidance is the clear direction in whatever we are doing. It is always fully present, and as such, we don't have to make decisions. We only need to discover them. How is this possible? Well, decisions are already known in mind, right? So there's nothing for us to make. There's simply something for us to discover. The complete idea, the cosmic counterpart, is already there, awaiting our discovery. So when we choose to move in the direction of the thing we're praying for, not only is our prayer answered, it's answered in the way we want it to be answered, not randomly or oppositely or disappointingly, but the way we want our prayer to be answered. There's a story of an urban woman who goes to visit friends in the country, and she takes a walk out in nature, and she's so delighted to be out of the city, and she gets lost. So she's in the woods trying to find her way back to the house, and she can't. And eventually she's frantic and desperate. So she sits under a tree and prays to God to lead her out of the forest. A few days later, she's back in the city at her bridge game, complaining about how God never answers her prayers. And a friend said, well, wait a minute, you were hopelessly lost in the woods, and then you prayed, and now you're here. So how did that not get answered? She said, well, a hunter found me. If that hadn't happened, I'd still be sitting under that tree waiting for God to answer my prayer. Yeah. Prayer is always answered. We need to be sharp enough to understand this and recognize it when it happens in the way it happens. I think the reason people sometimes complain about prayer's seeming ineffectiveness is that they're looking for something to come from the outside. Something separate and external that somehow bypasses the self. Right? But there is no outside. There is only the self. And prayer is always answered. Would you like to hear some more good news? We don't need any special equipment or personnel to get the job done. I'm kind of sad because I like equipment. I love accoutrement. When I became a raw vegan, I had to buy a new fancy food processor. And I had to get a Vitamix and a mandolin slicer and a special vegetable peeler. I know we have 2 or 3 other raw vegans out there, so Erna's nodding. She knows what I mean. I love the equipment. And when I started training for a triathlete, I needed to have my bike tuned up and get a new helmet and a wetsuit for the swimming because it's cold up here, 3 different kinds of shoes, and eventually a knee brace, but that's another story. So all kinds of cool gadgets. But you know what? We don't need any of that. We don't need rosary beads or rugs to pray. We don't need a priest or a rabbi or an imam to pray. We don't need to get down on our knees or bow our heads or fold our hands to pray. We don't need anything like that. We only need ourselves and our beautiful minds to pray, because we are already centered in God, and God is centered in us. Charles Fillmore said it so perfectly: the mind is the connecting link between God and oneself. And it's interesting, the faculty we think of as our individual mind is actually a state of consciousness within the mind of God. It's not something separate. So when we move into the quiet to pray, we're not leaving our mind and magically entering into communion with Spirit. That's not possible, because we cannot escape ourselves. Although that might be good sometimes. Don't you think? Like 1 or 2 minutes a day? Yeah, we don't get to do that. We cannot escape ourselves. So we have to bring to our prayer a state of consciousness that matches it. If we're praying for peace, we don't get to leave our chaotic mind behind to get there. We have to bring a consciousness of peace to our prayer. If we're praying for love, we have to bring a loving consciousness to our prayer. Whatever we're praying for, we must bring to the prayer the corresponding consciousness. See, prayer is not something we do. It's something that unfolds in our own consciousness. And our consciousness is a center of power within God consciousness. The mind of God is not something out there that we have to search for or try to tap into. It's right here, right now, and we are already in it. We're already in it. And this is a good thing. This is a very good thing for us. What does it mean in practical terms? Let's say you're dealing with an issue. Is anybody here dealing with an issue? Be honest. Oh, come on. Is anybody here not dealing with an issue? Good, because I was going to excuse those people to go home. But even when life is perfect and wonderful and everything is lovely, there's always more, right? Because the best keeps getting better. So whatever we're working on, it has a cosmic counterpart, and that cosmic counterpart holds within it the answer.